Thank you, Mr. Ford, members of the council. I will briefly introduce the application. I don't need to steal the applicant's thunder in terms of why they're here and what the application involves, and I'm sure Sharon may have some words to add. But briefly, just a few points. The Planning Commission considered this application over the course of 2 meetings, and they forwarded their recommendation to you in a letter which went, I think, slightly in more detail than their normal letters do, and that was in deference to the interest in this application and the multifaceted nature of their recommendation, where they broke it down into 4 subcomponent parts. The primary thing that the Planning Commission looks at is compliance with the comprehensive plan. In that regard, the Planning Commission found that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and primarily that's due to the fact that it is depicted or classified as a Priority 1 growth area on the growth areas map, and it's recommended for future commercial land use on the future land use map. Traffic has been expressed as a concern at the 2 Planning Commission meetings and in some of the correspondence that I've seen, some of which has gone your way leading up to this meeting. 2 points that I think are worth mentioning as we consider annexation at this point. One is the one that Mr. Carge just raised about the pending signal at Marlboro Extended and St. Michael's Road. And 2 is the fact that while traffic concerns certainly are a reason to consider and approve or reject any application, typically, not always, but typically, that is the kind of concern that we look at when there's actually a development proposal at the table. And there's not that tonight.
I don't think you did that.
You have seen, particularly those members of the council that have been around for a while, have seen annexations through the years, and I would estimate about roughly it's a 50-50 split in terms of the level of detail you get. Some folks, similar to the applicant tonight, are simply requesting to come into the town's jurisdiction with no express plans for development at this time, and then would seek that presumably at a later date. Others, particularly if it's a larger annexation, and I think the folks know that they're, asking a big ask, if you will, come in with at least a conceptual plan of what it is they intend to do upon annexation. There's no requirement to do so other than the requirement specified in the state law for annexation in terms of an annexation plan, but that doesn't get so much into a development plan. I'm sure that the applicant will state this in their presentation, but I think it's important to note that the issue is not as simple as if the annexation is approved, that equals development, and therefore if you deny the annexation, development won't occur. Development still could occur. The issue is really whether that occurs in the town's jurisdiction under the town's rules and regulations or in the county's jurisdiction under their rules and regulations. Finally, another complaint that was expressed at the Planning Commission is the fear of strip commercial development along Route 33 extending westward in particular to St. Michael's. For the benefit of particularly the council, but everyone, I have sketched, watch out Megan, I'm going to laser you, sketched the location of the proposed annexation in red on the town zoning map behind you, and the bluish green blob west of it is roughly corresponds to the green belt as identified in the comprehensive plan. So I think it's fair to say that the town actually agrees with this sentiment of a concern over strip development, so much so that 12 years ago we established the urban growth boundary, not just on St. Michael's Road, but around the entire perimeter of the town of Easton. And in this specific area, On the north side of St. Michael's Road, that boundary is located 4 parcels to the west of the proposed annexation parcel. And on the south side, we actually are already up against the growth boundary as it ends at Radcliffe Manor Lane. And as I said, I've drawn that in there. What's hard to see from this area is a little tiny area of white between the proposed annexation and the green belt is designated in the comp plan.
Annexation, in terms of whether it's consistent with the entire plan, is certainly something that you can look at. But there isn't anything specifically in the law that requires a specific comparison for the plan as a whole. What there is in the law is a requirement that the annexation plan, which is an exhibit to the annexation resolution, and it was in your packet, that plan has to be consistent with the municipal growth element of the comprehensive plan. So that's what the law specifically requires. Certainly you can look to any other parts of the plan in making your consideration, but you cannot grant the annexation unless you find that those elements are consistent, is how it's worded. So, and the municipal growth element is the section that talks about what the priority 1 means. You know, it goes through that definition of when it's appropriate for annexation in terms of priority 1 status. And then the annexation plan goes through how it compares to the comprehensive plan and things. So that document has to be consistent with that chapter of the plan specifically.
And could you also touch a bit on the discretionary powers of the council?
Yeah, annexations are discretionary. In order to grant it, you have to find, like I just said about the annexation plan being consistent with the municipal growth element. But in order to deny an annexation, there's no specific requirements for that. It is a completely discretionary action on your part to decide to enlarge the corporate boundaries of the town. So.
Good evening. Thank you, members of the Town Council. For the record, Zach Smith here before you this evening on behalf of 2 property owners, Route 33 LLC and the Standard Fusee Corporation. Together, these property owners are petitioning the town for annexation of 13.025 acres of land that's situated just to the west of town and is contiguous to the existing town of Easton. Turn it up. Is that better?
Robert, you might want to raise that.
Can you raise that? Stand.
He's a little bit taller than me.
Just speak louder. Is that better if I just speak louder?
Yeah, that helps too.
Give me your best card voice.
Sorry. I'll do what I can. So the smaller of the 2 properties, it's approximately 1.2 acres. That Route 33 LLC property is currently zoned general commercial by the county. The Standard Fusee Corporation, the larger of the 2, which is approximately 11 acres, is currently zoned LI by the county. The requests to the council are essentially 2. First, that you annex these properties into the town of Easton at this time. And second, that upon annexation you apply town CG zoning. And we believe that both those actions are entirely consistent with the town's comprehensive plan, which I'll explain in a minute, and also in the best interest of the town of Easton. Just as a way of background, just to explain what brought us here this evening, Standard Fusee Corporation has been manufacturing pyrotechnic products at this property for about the last 65 years, or at least they or one of their predecessors in interest. And that has been a perfectly appropriate place to perform that activity. But over the last, say, 15 years or so, largely because the town has entitled additional development adjacent to their property, commercial shopping center to the north and east, residential subdivisions to the south, it no longer appears to be an appropriate place to manufacture explosive products. And for that reason, and perhaps other reasons, the Standard Fusee Corporation decided a year or so ago that they were going to move those operations. And it would have been great if, in my opinion, if that had happened here in Talbot County, but unfortunately that wasn't in the cards. Standard Fusee Corporation owns a large piece of property in Indiana, and it's a large farm, 400-acre farm surrounded by other farms. And it's a much more appropriate place, in their opinion, to manufacture these products. Frankly, we thought that the neighborhood would receive that well. Not a lot of residential property owners want a explosives factory next to their property, and there hasn't been a catastrophe at this site, but there have been a few incidents over time. I'm not sure if the council recalls any of them or not. But nonetheless, the property owner has decided to move the manufacturing operations to Easton. He still will continue to perform sort of the CEO functions here in Easton, have the administration of that corporation here in Easton. The president, Mr. Jay McLaughlin, who's in the crowd tonight, has his home in Easton and has for 2 decades, and he has no intention of leaving. So while the manufacturing operations will move to Indiana, his corporate nerve center, so to speak, will continue to be here in the town of Easton. Also, there is a small manufacturing business that he has on site now that he intends to keep in Easton, at least for the time being. But neither of those things, the corporate nerve center or the Martin Shaft, require an 11-acre property, and nor all the numerous buildings that are currently on the site. And for those reasons, Standard Fusee Corporation has decided that that is no longer a needed location for them, and they're ready to move. So, upon making that decision, the property owner did what I think the town would want them. They said, well, what does the town want there? And so they opened up the comprehensive plan, and fortunately, it's very clear. The town wants it to be annexed into the town of Easton and have commercial land uses moving forward. So the property owner gladly decided to petition the town for annexation and that zoning. Before doing so, the property owner, I think quite reasonably, reached out to the other folks that are similarly situated, meaning the other commercial properties that are on the north side of 33 between Standard Fusee and the edge of the town's urban growth boundary, as that boundary is defined in your comprehensive plan. And so that's a handful of properties stretching down to what was most recently North Bend Galleries. I believe it might have closed, but essentially town and country. And so we reached out to all those folks. We met with a number of them. I think generally they're interested in being a part of the town of Easton at some point, but did not seem to have a sense of urgency, with the exception being Route 33 LLC. Those property owners there have a number of commercial buildings, number of existing tenants they're very happy with. No immediate plans to do anything on that site, but have had some septic issues in the past, or at least anticipate having some septic problems in the future. So they were very much interested in being annexed into the town so that they can acquire sewer service. So that's really the driver for that. I think there are numerous benefits to the proposed annexation to the town, and I provided those in a memo that I submitted to the council, but just to touch on them briefly, because I do think they're important. And that question was raised at the Planning Commission, so what's in it for us? What's in it for the town? And that's certainly a reasonable question. And so some of the benefits that we'd identify is, one, that this annexation would allow the town to expand your tax base. And I guess that's true to some extent for most annexations, to the extent that you're increasing your boundary, taking in greater land areas. But these properties are unique in that they're already developed, assessed value of approximately $3 million. And I think more importantly, the town does not have to then recognize significant costs expanding your services, because the services either already exist. For example, town fire service, you already serve that property, it's immediately adjacent. Aren't the town's maintenance requirement. For example, St. Michael's Road is a state highway, the town's not obligated to maintain it, and or the property owner will pay for those costs. For example, the extension of sewer service. These property owners are willing and able to make those connections upon annexation if the town will grant that request. Importantly, I think, too, this annexation will give the town control over the destiny of this area. And I think that's something that Mr. Thomas touched on in the beginning. These properties are currently in the county under the county's land use regulations. The town currently does not have a say in what happens there. And so upon annexation, you'll then bring those properties into town, and then you then have control over what happens. You can apply your processes and procedures, your comprehensive plan, your zoning ordinance, your landscaping regulations, your sign regulations, your stormwater ordinance. You also have an opportune forum to provide community input, to consider traffic impacts and the like. The annexation will allow for appropriate commercial land uses while prohibiting industrial land uses. Currently, the Orion property, the Standard Fusee property, is zoned light industrial, and that permits a number of industrial land uses. And I hope you would agree that, while those land uses are appropriate in town, and we certainly need them in certain places in town, this gateway into our community, proximate to residential subdivisions, is not the appropriate location for these traditional industrial land uses. And that's certainly consistent with what your comprehensive plan says. The annexation will allow the properties to be connected to town sewer system, and thereby allow those existing septic systems to be eliminated. there's empirical evidence that public sewer is better for the bay and surrounding land than septic systems. These septic systems are in relative close proximity to the Treadavon River and Dixon Creek, and I would hope that the town would support an opportunity to eliminate those septic systems and tie those properties onto the town sewer system. I think importantly, and I'll touch on the comp plan in a minute, but this annexation will allow the town to fulfill that vision in the comprehensive plan that establishes an urban growth boundary, identifies properties that are to be in town and therefore developed, and recognizing the need to develop those lands relatively efficiently so that you can protect and preserve the agricultural fields and open spaces beyond. That's sort of the idea in the plan, and in order to preserve those open space areas and to reduce that development pressure, you necessarily have to allow for that development to go somewhere, and I think we all agree that in town is the appropriate place for that to happen. And then a similar point is that this will allow for the redevelopment of underutilized properties. That's a key tenet of smart growth, something that we see particularly when you have already developed properties that are immediately adjacent to town boundaries where town services can be extended and provided town infrastructure exists. It makes sense to tie those on. And so for those numerous reasons, we think there are tremendous benefits to the town to annexing these properties and zoning them commercial. And I also think it's important to touch on what happens if you don't annex it. And I certainly am not trying to present this as a threat or anything like that, but I think Mr. Thomas touched on this in the beginning in his comments, in that these properties are already developed. Don't be misled into picturing this as the difference between developed property and pristine open space, because it's not. I mean, these are already developed properties. And perhaps more importantly, they enjoy commercial or industrial zoning under the county's land use regulations that permit numerous types of activities and development. And if this annexation is turned down, then I don't think it's reasonable to expect the property owner just to stand by and do nothing. That might be different if the properties were zoned agricultural or undeveloped. But in this case, where they have the zoning, where they have existing investments in buildings and infrastructure and carrying costs and maintenance and taxes and insurance and all the things that go along with that, they're not just going to sit and do nothing. And I don't think the town would want them to sit and do nothing and just have abandoned buildings on this important gateway into your community. So I think the property owner will quite reasonably move forward and try to do whatever is permissible under the county's land use regulations. And I would submit to you that the town and the neighbors may or may not be happy with the form and function of what that produces. I mean, if you look at allowable uses in the county's LI zoning, it permits things like a poultry processing facility, an asphalt plant, and a junkyard, and a FedEx terminal. And those are appropriate land uses in the right place. But I don't think that a gateway into our community and lands adjacent to residential subdivisions is the right location. Just to touch on the consistency with the comprehensive plan, I think the council obviously knows that land use planning in Maryland is sort of centered on this idea of comprehensive planning. And so the community goes out, they set a vision for the community, they identify goals and objectives needed to reach that targeted vision, and then they memorialize those ideas into a comprehensive plan. The town certainly has done that in the past. You've done it most recently in 2010. You have what I think is a very good plan. But it's important to follow that plan. That plan sets the direction for the community and how we're going to grow. And not in the context of, or in the abstract of one individual application, but in the context of the overall community and how we foresee it growing 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And so consistency with the comp plan, I think, is very important. And fortunately, I submit to you that you're not going to find an application that's more straightforward, consistent with the comprehensive plan than the one that's before you tonight. The comp plan very clearly states that these properties should be annexed into the town of Easton. It identifies them as priority 1 annexation areas. It also shows these properties on the future land use map as commercial, both of which are entirely consistent with the requests that we've put before you this evening. The comp plan does touch on several things I think that have been raised before at the Planning Commission and likely will be raised tonight. And one of them is this idea of regional retail and the idea that perhaps Easton has too much regional retail at the moment. As the council knows, CG zoning, commercial zoning in general, doesn't permit in Easton major retail, doesn't permit shopping center development, those things can only be entitled through the PUD process and only with the approval of the town council. So it's certainly not the case that if you annex these properties and zone them general commercial or some other commercial zoning, that's going to entitle these folks or their successors to build shopping centers or major retail. Now, it may be the case that at some point in the future, an application is presented. I don't know. It's hard to say what will happen. But certainly, if that does happen, and before anything gets approved, this body or your successors will have the full discretion to say yes or no to any such proposal. Another concern that we may hear or have heard in the past is about the loss of industrial land. And it's absolutely true that industrial land is very important to a community. And I think the town of Easton has significant undeveloped industrial land at the moment. I don't think our problem is a lack of industrial land. I think the concern is really a lack of industrial users. And certainly the town and the county should continue to do what we can to encourage industrial land uses to locate in Easton. I would submit to you that this is not the appropriate place for those because it's on this gateway and it's proximate to these residential subdivisions. That's not just my opinion, that's what the comprehensive plan says. And so for all the language in the comprehensive plan that talks about the importance of industrial land uses, it clearly doesn't contemplate them on these sites because it goes on to identify future land use on these properties should be commercial. And I would distinguish commercial from business commercial. When you look at the plan, the future land use map in particular, it identifies properties in Easton that are appropriate for business commercial zoning. I think most recently the town council annexed the Talbot Commerce Park and zoned those properties business commercial, consistent with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan does not designate these properties as business commercial. It designates these properties as commercial. So therefore, to follow the plan, to implement the plan, I think the reasonable choices would be CR, CG, or CL. CR is your downtown commercial zoning, not consistent with what exists out there today or what I think the town would want to see down there in the future. And so we think the two logical zoning classifications are general commercial or commercial limited. And when you look at the overall area, not just the Orion property, but all of the various properties in that area that are planned to be annexed and zoned commercial, I think you would agree that they appear very much consistent with general commercial zoning. The size of the lots, the form and function of the buildings, the uses that exist there today. Now, the Standard Fusee property is not currently zoned commercial by the county, and it's a larger piece of property, so it perhaps is a different set of circumstances. It's clearly not the smaller lot size that you typically find in the CG and that you see in the other various properties that are planned for annexation at some point. We've heard at the Planning Commission, and I'm sure we may hear tonight, some concerns about traffic. And I think Mr. Thomas touched on this in his remarks. And, it's important to keep in mind what we're talking about tonight is not entitling development. It's not going to change the physical characteristics of what exists on the ground. What we're talking about tonight are moving lines on maps. Very important changes, I agree. Very important. But, in and of themselves, do not impact traffic. Now, what may impact traffic is a development proposal that may come. And that's true whether it's in the town or the county, whether it's industrial or commercial. The next use of this site, Orion in particular, could have impacts on traffic. But the time to assess those traffic impacts is in the context of a particular development proposal. That's how traffic impacts are assessed. You can't just assess, I guess you could, but in practice, you don't assess traffic impacts based on some, uncertain amount of development occurring. What you do is you take a development proposal and you assess the traffic impacts that are likely to come based on the existing conditions and the added impact of that development. And the appropriate time to do that is when this development proposal comes forward. And that's consistent with the town's ordinary policies and procedures. It's something that you do regularly. And it's not inconsistent or inappropriate if you get a development proposal in the future to require that developer to prepare a traffic impact study. And we have heard some criticism in the past about, well, that guy works for the developer. He's not going to tell you what the real impacts are. I disagree with that. These traffic engineers are licensed professionals in the state of Maryland that that do a professional service and they're bound by professional obligations. But even if that was true, the town's engineer, and in this case the State Highway Administration, are going to review any traffic impact study that's prepared. And so you'll certainly have a good safeguard and a check on the accuracy and the veracity of that document. But to that end, I mean, we're happy to say tonight that when a redevelopment proposal for the Orion property comes forward, and we don't have a plan, there is no current plan, what we're trying to do is establish the rules by which that property will be redeveloped. But when a proposal does come forward to the town, we would certainly agree that that's an appropriate time to require the applicant or his successor to prepare a traffic impact study. I don't think that needs to be a condition of approval, because I think you have that authority, or at least your staff and your planning commission have that authority in it. But we're certainly willing to agree to that. And just one more note about traffic. I mean, I think you might hear that the traffic is unreasonable, it's horrible, it doesn't work. I would say to you that, traffic is somewhat relative, and I'm not dismissing folks' concerns, but this notion that when I want to use the road, nobody else better be on it is not reasonable. We live in a community, a vibrant community, and there are lots of people moving about, going different places, and a necessary consequence of that is there's going to be other folks using the facility. I think the important point is to make sure that conditions are safe and to make sure that the volumes aren't unreasonable. And I think those are the type of evaluations that a traffic impact study can provide and can assure that all intersections and all roadways continue to operate at an acceptable level of service. Another point is on connectivity, and Mr. Ford has raised this point, I know, on past applications, and we anticipate hearing more about it here tonight. We think that's a good idea. And so I guess the concept there would be that this site is connected to other sites, particularly the Gray Block property next door and the Waterside Village. You may recall there's an access road being built between Waterside and Gray Block, and the town council helped ensure that the Gray Block property was enabled to connect to that at some point in the future. And that just makes a lot of sense. I think we've probably all been to areas, particularly suburban areas, where you can't go from one site to the other without getting out on the main roadway, and that's frustrating and inefficient. And so we certainly agree that it makes complete sense to tie this site to those other sites, and we're willing and able to make that connection, to pay for it, to construct it, to the extent that those other property owners will permit it. We don't have the ability to compel them to do it. We've reached out, we've asked if we could, we haven't yet heard back from them one way or another, but to the extent that those folks say no, we would hope that the council would help us complete that negotiation. I'm confident that those folks will be before you at some point in the future for some request, and may be more willing to acquiesce to the town's request than to ours. And then I guess the last point is about timing. We heard a concern about timing, Mr. Alsbach, and I'm sure he'll mention it here this evening. And I think the suggestion was made by Mr. Alsbach that, it's not necessarily inappropriate that this property be annexed at some point. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I apologize if I'm getting it wrong. But that now might not be the time. And his concern was about the build-out of Waterside, the build-out of Easton Village. And so his suggestion to the Planning Commission was just wait. And we think that's unreasonable to the applicant for the reasons that I've stated already. I mean, they have carrying costs, they have maintenance and insurance and taxes and all these things. They have existing buildings and existing property rights. But we do understand, and who knows how long it may take for those things to happen, and who knows what the political climate will be when that does happen. But we do understand the point, and we understand the concern. This process takes time. It's taken us 6 months to get here, as we've heard tonight. If the county doesn't agree with the town's rezoning, they can essentially put a hold on the property for a period of 5 years. And so for us, if we have to wait and see, and then potentially wait 5.5 or more years, then that's not something that the property owner is willing to accept. What they would be willing to accept, if that is a concern of the town, if the town was willing to annex the property this time, agree to the zoning at this time, and they knew that in 5 years, those would be the rules that they would have to play by, then this property owner would be willing to sit on the property for that amount of time and then look for the next use after that time period has elapsed. But again, it's important that they know today what the game's going to be in X amount of time so that they can move forward. If not, if the response is just wait and see, I think they're quite reasonably going to try to move forward with whatever development they may be entitled to under the county's rules and regulations. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's the extent of what I wanted to share with the council.
Well, my name is Dirk Bartlett. I reside at 7905 Bloomfield Road. I'm not speaking for the county council in any way tonight. I'm speaking for myself. So in that regard, I'm happy to wait.
Go ahead, you're up there.
Okay, thank you. This annexation application concerns the county because Route 33 is sort of the gateway to the rest of the county and the western side of the county. And this property, as it exists today, is a very good buffer, as it exists right now, between the commercial growth, the big box growth behind it, the BJs, and the other things that are going to build out on that property on Waterside Village, and the Route 33 corridor. These are viable businesses. They operate there now. Yes, they do have maintenance requirements and other costs that they're going to have to do, but I can assure you, as soon as you give them the annexation and the upgraded zoning, those jobs that are there will be gone because the commercial growth is more valuable than those jobs. The county has worked very hard in the past to work with the town of Easton to provide industrial parks that we used to manage as a county to the town, the Talbot Commerce Park being one, the Clifton Industrial Park being another. All parks that we just found were cumbersome for the county because of their limitations regarding septic systems. The Talbot Commerce Park had to operate on marginal septic systems. They were limited in how much they could build out because they couldn't get the health department approvals. So we basically agreed to bring that into the town. We've provided lots of industrial land, commercial land for the town from the county. And the same thing with the Clifton Industrial Park. It isn't practical to have industrial parks in the county on septic systems that are marginal. And so we've done a lot to provide the town those opportunities to annex those areas and to provide that kind of land for you all to use in the town. This particular parcel is not suitable for commercial growth. You may recall the Home Depot parcel that we had in the, I think it was at the time, the Talbot Commerce Park years ago. That was a very contentious site plan. And it was a 13-acre parcel, identically sized to these other two parcels. And that particular proposal, that Home Depot was, if you can believe it, to be proposed on septic, which was crazy. Not to mention the traffic that was needed on the Glebe Road, which ultimately killed the project because the road was in such poor shape. So there are good spots for commercial growth and there are not good spots for commercial growth. As you look at that property, as you go by it on Route 33, it is a great buffer as it exists today for the other areas behind it, the woodland preserves, etc. Also, I have a little pet peeve about green belts. People think that these green belts are some way to preserve land for the future. They aren't. They are green ink on a map, and they mean nothing. They are areas that can be annexed later in the future, and they're basically areas to hold with lesser zoning until such time as the town decides to annex or to move outside of that. There's nothing that permanently preserves land in a green belt. It's just green ink on a map.
Aside from the parcel next to where we're
There is a 55-acre parcel of woods that was part of the deal for Waterside Village that is permanently preserved. That is true. And that may be part of that green belt, or probably is. But the rest of it, the land across Route 33, is owned by the Gannon family, for example. And if you want to see what the Gannon family can do to farm fields, you need only look at Route 50 to see the properties that they've developed. And if if that is what is pretended for the Route 33 corridor, that's a big problem with the county. That's a big problem with the citizens of the western part of the county. So I would certainly, speaking as Dirk Bartlett, agree that the lesser zoning, if you're going to do something at all, is better than nothing, better than the commercial zoning that you might otherwise apply. But I would say that what's there now, if it stays in the county, the jobs will stay there. Those properties could be redeveloped. We have STAR legislation, which gives them, that we just passed, that gives them much more flexibility of what they might be able to do on those parcels as a redevelopment opportunity in the future. And we did that to try to resuscitate some of these older industrial zones that could be redeveloped, but they'll get more flexibility in what they could do with it. So we don't need more intensity on that location because it's just going to be, once Waterside Village is built out completely, it's going to be too crowded traffic-wise, and it's not going to be an appropriate entrance to the Route 33 corridor. I thank you all for your time. You've been more than generous.
For the record, Tom Allspock, 295 Bay Street, number 1. I'm speaking on behalf of Public Preservation Alliance and myself. I've been a taxpayer, property owner, small business owner in the town of Easton for almost 40 years now. So I have a personal investment in this situation that goes beyond my representation of DPA. Public Preservation Alliance is not here, nor am I here to oppose annexation of this property. The question I think before you is what is the right time for annexation to occur, and even more importantly, on what terms should the annexation occur. We do not believe that now is the right time, nor do we believe that there are adequate terms and conditions on the table that would justify annexing the property without further consideration. The Planning Commission, as you know, had a very robust discussion about this, and in the end did vote to approve annexation, but the vote was a split vote of 3-2. So it was not a resounding recommendation that the property be annexed right now. Now, I think the place to begin is with a couple of facts that really are completely beyond dispute by anyone involved in looking at this situation. And the first is that certainly this is a priority 1 annexation site under the current comprehensive plan. That does not mean that this council is compelled to annex this site. It does not mean the council is compelled to do anything about annexation on this property during the current life of the comprehensive plan. What the plan actually says about priority 1 annexation sites like this one is that priority 1 areas are deemed appropriate for consideration for annexation during the life of this plan. That's all that it says. It's appropriate for you to consider it. You're doing it right now. During the life of this plan now extends until at least 2020. This property can be considered for annexation anytime between now and the end of 2020, and you're still entirely consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's one important thing to bear in mind as you consider this. Secondly, and Ms. Van Amber appropriately pointed this out, the council is authorized and empowered to decline to annex this property for any reason or for no reason. You don't have to give a reason. You can just decide you're not going to annex it. And the law on this is very clear, and there's some important aspects of it that were set out by the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is, as I'm sure you know, Maryland's highest court. And in regard to the obligation to annex, the court said, and this is a case of Mayor and County of Rockville versus Brookfield and Turner Construction Company, a municipality is under no legal obligation in the first instance to annex contiguous territory and may reject the petition for annexation for no reason at all. Moreover, and I think what's particularly germane for my concerns and for your consideration tonight is your authority to attach conditions to an annexation. And what the court said in the same place is that in considering an annexation, a municipality may impose such conditions by way of agreement as it sees fit. If the party seeking municipality is a party seeking annexation does not wish to annex under those conditions imposed, he is free to withdraw his petition for annexation. And what I think is lacking here is there's no plan for how this property will be used upon annexation. I think it's very important for you to consider the necessity of having an agreed plan for how the property will be used upon annexation. That is a binding part of the annexation agreement. I think that's in the best interest of the neighbors to this site, the best interest of the taxpayers in this community. And in fact, I noticed in the letter that was submitted to you by Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, they also urge you to consider making the requirement of an area plan, I think they refer to it, as part of this annexation process. Now, the reason that it's critical to have an agreed plan for how the property will be used upon annexation is that we have this, I won't go so far to call it a myth, but it is, to me, a gross overstatement that you gain all this control by annexing property without a plan. To a large extent, when a property is annexed without an agreed plan, you lose control. And that is because until that property comes into town, the applicant has no rights at all under your zoning ordinance. But as soon as that property is annexed and is assigned a zoning classification, that property owner now has vested legal statutory rights to do certain things on that property. And in particular, those things include to take advantage of any of the permitted uses in the respective zones. Now, yes, it's true, you can tweak what they do with setback requirements, height requirements, putting bricks on the facade, but the permitted uses are there, and you cannot prevent the property owner, once the property is annexed, from taking advantage of those permitted uses. And so you need to consider what those uses might be, which will then be freely available to be imposed on the property in the absence of an agreed plan ahead of time once it is annexed. I'm sure I don't need to walk you through the uses for the commercial properties that the applicant, the commercial zoning, I should say, that the applicant has requested, the Planning Commission unanimously rejected. They would include such things as fast food restaurants, a new, what's this one out on Route 50, something farms, the convenience store, property, those kinds of uses, right up through larger scale commercial properties. The Planning Commission took a good step in recommending BC, but that still should not provide you with enough of a comfort level in the absence of an agreed plan for use of the property upon annexation. And that's because, look at the uses in the our BC zone. There's some uses that are every bit as problematic as the ones that Zach referred to that are available in the county. You've got things like convenience stores up to 5,000 feet, steel fabrication facilities, truck terminals, industrial parks. There's a concrete manufacturing use. Agriculture. Agriculture is one of them. What's agriculture defined as? It's defined as animal husbandry. Someone could put a pig farm on that property under BC zoning. And don't laugh when I come back to that, because this ploy has been tried before. Now, let me just explode what I think is one other myth that I know is circulating, because I've heard it from representatives of the economic development folks, from people in upper levels of the town. I heard it again tonight. Oh, if it stays in the county, we're exposed to these uses, and this is going to be turned into a poultry processing facility. This property is not going to become a poultry processing facility if it stays in the county. I mean, you need to spend millions of dollars on wastewater treatment. You can't just dump your processed wastewater from a poultry plant into a septic tank. Allen Foods, about 10 years ago, spent $4 million on a wastewater treatment plant for their poultry processing facility, and it largely didn't work. They still got cited all the time, and now they're closing down and leaving. There's no way a poultry processing facility is going to go on that site if it's not annexed into town. So I hope that red herring can be put to rest. The other concern that you should have, and another way in which you lose control, and here's where I'm going to come back to the pig farm, is that, let's be serious here. We know that whatever zoning you put on it, what's really going to happen here is a PUD. What's going to happen is, here's the annexation site right down here, and this is in front of you as well. This property is already in the town, zoned LI. Here's a remaining parcel not yet developed in Waterside Village. But what we'll get is proposed PUD expansion of this Waterside Village out to include all this. It's too enticing for that. That's the highest and best use economically for a developer of that property. And that's what's going to happen. Now, you say, well, we have all these ways under our PUD ordinance to prevent any untoward results. What happens is the same thing that happened when you approved this PUD over here. Do you remember how that came into being? They wanted to put a big box out there under a PUD. Your zoning didn't allow for it. And they came to you and said, guess what? If you don't approve our PUD, including this big box target, we're going to just use the commercial underlying zoning where we have these absolute rights, and we're going to put a bunch of commercial pads out there, all willy-nilly, and it will be a very unattractive situation for everyone. So you got to approve our PUD. The same thing will happen when this PUD comes to pass, and you'll be told either you approve it, or we'll go back into these unattractive commercial rights we would have under the underlying commercial zoning, or the pig farm under the BC zoning, and that's what's going to go on the property unless you approve our PUD. So you lose your leverage by bringing the property into town without an agreed plan in place first, no matter how many rights you have once you have the property under town zoning to tweak how it's going to look. There's a precedent for the pig farming. That's what happened on the site across from Town and Country, a little further down the road. They wanted to do a big commercial development down there. It was turned down by the county, and so they said, okay, well, we're going to put a pig farm out there, and they did. I mean, if you remember, there was a pig farm there for it lasted about a year, and then the reality of operating a pig farm kind of, became apparent, and the pig farm went away. St. Wadsworth tried to do the same thing next to St. Michael's when they wouldn't annex his farm to put 300 houses on. And Pete may remember this. He wanted to put a pig farm down there because they wouldn't annex him, and with a bunch of these apparently foul-smelling ginkgo trees. He was going to put a ginkgo orchard out there. All kinds of really perverse uses. But it was used because he tried to use them as a leverage to get the property in. So I won't belabor that. My point is that why would you give away the leverage you have right now to get an agreed plan for how this property should be used when the developer has no rights to fall back on to hold out as a threat against you if they don't get what they want, when you have full legal ability to do that. So let's see a plan for this property that takes into account all the concerns everyone has, and then if we can satisfy these issues that have been troubling to the people who have spoken against the proposal at the Plan Commission level, then we'll move forward. There are multiple benefits to requiring that there be a true plan for development before the property is annexed. Now, you've done this before. In your annexation agreement with Shore Health System regarding the hospital, if you look at that annexation agreement, there's a specific provision on use of the property in there that details what can go on that site, what the use will be. When the town of Trapp annexed the land east of Route 50, in that annexation agreement, there's a specific provision in there on what the use of that property will be. When St. Michael's annexed the property for Miles Point, there's a specific provision, several provisions in that annexation agreement that recite in detail exactly what the use of the property is going to be. In this annexation agreement, there's no such thing. All they're saying is, bring us into town, give us commercial zoning, and at some point in the future, we'll let you know what we want to put there, and you can rely on your zoning ordinance for protection of the citizens in the town. Why give up the protection you have now when a developer has no rights? So, if you could insist upon, or would insist upon, should insist upon a plan, multiple benefits flow from that. For one thing, this traffic issue. Why don't we see what exactly is going to be proposed for that site, what's going to go on that site, because then we know what we may need to do to address the traffic concerns that people have, what should be done to mitigate traffic problems if they can be mitigated, and most importantly, who is going to pay for that mitigation? Who's going to pay for it? You're permitted to do that in an annexation agreement. A plan in place now would ensure if there is to be commercial development out that way, what type of commercial development, whereas under a PUD, you could go for major retail, another store the size of BJ's, 65,000 square feet. Let's take that off the table. The only way to do that is with an agreed plan before you bring it into town. Protecting the forested area, it was good to hear Zach say they are going to do that. Make it part of the plan up front so that it flows with the annexation and protects that property. Require new development of a type that will be consistent with what the SAGE report told you. You spent thousands of dollars on, and it concluded that what you want are certain types of jobs, certain types of development, not new, more additional retail that will not provide jobs that will turn into careers and good benefits for the young people who work here. I'm almost done. What you really need to look at is attached to the small version of the plan I sent out, I gave out to you, are two things. One is a summary of the almost 250,000 square feet of new retail that you've approved in the past few years and is still not yet fully built out all through here. And at the same time, we're hearing tonight, we want zoning to bring even more retail. Why do we need even more retail, more development when we haven't even built out this big site here? A lot of these buildings and smaller buildings out front here are not built out. The site next to where the ribbon factory is, what's going to happen there? You know, infill is the kind of development we all applaud, and here's a place where we need some infill to occur before we bring more new property into town. You also have some mechanisms like a developer's rights and responsibility agreement, by the way, that could be used, I believe, in concert with an annexation agreement to get the type of use on the property that you would want to have to preserve and protect the citizens of the town against the possibility of uses that would not be so good. Also attached to my handout is a truly independent traffic study, results from it, that talk about what the real impact of traffic has been, even pre the new development that's coming down the road that's going to further exacerbate the traffic. This needs to be recognized and responded to and dealt with by looking at what use might go on the site before the property is annexed, and then all holds are, no holds are barred, I should say, to further development that might be of a type that will exacerbate the traffic problem without a prior agreement in place for how to control it. So I'll let it end there, but I just would conclude by saying, that we all talk about the nature and character of our town that we all care about so much. Everybody here cares about that, and I include the applicant and the applicant's attorney as well. But, I remember the very first one of these kind of proceedings I attended 25 years ago. on something going on down St. Michael's Road. And it was the same story you hear all the time. Well, we're just going to bring on this one more thing. It won't be that big a problem. The nature and character of a community changes incrementally, step by step, slowly over time. And then you turn around at some point and say, how did all this happen? Well, it happened because you didn't plan. We have a planning commission, we have a comprehensive plan, but we don't do enough planning. We hardly do any planning. Here is a chance to plan. Plan what we want to have on this site that's basically a gateway to Easton that affects not just the people in the town, but all these folks that live out the Western Peninsula. Here's a chance to plan for it. So let's put our heads together, come up with a plan, incorporate that into an annexation agreement, and then have at it. Go ahead and annex it on that basis when the plan is in place. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.